him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back.
Hello listeners, welcome back to On the Spot. This is Paula Schaffner. This week I'll be talking about Season 1, some of the things that particularly struck me, and yes, my top 5 episodes. To begin with, there were some things that surprised me about this season because although I was a fan at the time and have watched the show off and on over the years, it's not a show that I have memorized. One thing that surprised me is there aren't really subplots like compared to something like The Brady Bunch. It's like they needed to make room for the routines and jokes and just don't have that kind of underplot for the most part. The exception of that would, of course, be the two-parter. But for most of the episodes, there's the problem, and it's explored, and then there's some kind of resolution. I was pleasantly surprised that the show remains funny, despite some questionable jokes. I did laugh out loud a lot, and I smiled fondly. Overall, it was just a really enjoyable season. I will say that the running jokes were less of a thing than I expected, especially things like Juan's notes, because this is definitely a show that had a lot of catchphrases and running gags. Although there is that in season 1, it's less of a thing than I think we get in seasons 2 and 3. I would also say that this season doesn't have as many of the episodes that I remember fondly, although there are definitely some very strong episodes that I'd forgotten. And I don't know if that's just because it's the first season and they're kind of settling in, or because I was 7 years old during most of the first run, and I might not have been old enough to remember the show as vividly. I'm not going to comment on the directing of Bob Alejandro, which was for most of the season, because I don't really have anything to compare it to yet. I think I'll talk about that more when we get into season 2. But I will say the show seems to run smoothly. He gradually gets better at getting particular performances out of them. He does a nice job with ensemble work. The visual gags work. As for the characters and performers, Gabe Kaplan, although he's playing the title character, has sort of a Danza name. Gabe Kaplan is Gabe Kotter. He does take a while to come into his own. I did end up choosing him 5 times out of 22 for the head of the class, which is the character whose arc I was most interested in or who I was most entertained by. But this is mostly in the second half of the season. Kaplan clearly is not an actor in the earliest episodes because his background was stand-up comedy as opposed to the stage work that a lot of the cast had done. But by the time of the last episode of the season, Father Vinny, he can convincingly reminisce about his favorite uncle, so we can see how he's grown as an actor over those months. A lot of the show is Kaplan doing his shtick, not just the stand-up jokes, and of course we get him telling jokes to Marcia Strassman as Julie, usually the beginning and end of the show, but there's also the celebrity impressions that are included, particularly Groucho Marx, of course. I would say that Kaplan also learns to give shades and dimension to Kotter as he goes along, and we get to know him more as a person. He is the hero of the show, but he is definitely a flawed hero. I would say Marcia Strassman does her best with a mostly poorly defined character. I thought it was interesting watching the audition tapes recently that they mentioned that Julie was supposed to have a job in an art gallery, and it would have been interesting if they had gone in that direction rather than her just hanging out in the apartment for the most part. The actress and character both lend support to the two Gabes, and I think that Strassman and Kaplan have a lot of nice chemistry, and they give Gabe and Julie some good couple moments, including physical affection, which I didn't remember as much about the show, and I ended choosing her as head of the class twice. Of the students, of course, the breakout star is John Travolta. The teen idol thing aside, there are times when his line readings are very good and he steals scenes, and that happens even early on. The character is basically developed at this point, although we'll learn more about him in the next 3 seasons. I was most surprised that there's less about his love life than later, with him mostly just making out behind the billboard on 84th Street with a few girls, and once possibly with Rosalie in the Cotter's bathroom. Yeah, he had whatever relationship that was with Judy. I chose Vinny as the head of the class 3 times. Ron Palillo as Arnold is also a hit with audience in a different way. Sometimes his voice and intonation get laughs on straight lines, and Palillo quickly learns how to milk a laugh and time the follow-up lines. At the same time, we can see what a good reactive actor he is, since Arnold has high emotional intelligence and really listens and cares. Palillo does well with the relatively dramatic moments, too. However, I only chose Arnold as head of the class once, and that was tied with Gabe, although he does wonderful work in Whodunit, especially with Deborah Lee Scott as Rosalie. Arnold is definitely the sweetest sweat hog, and he's chivalrous with girls, with the exception of Judy Borden. Although his character is well developed already, there is much more to explore here, and in fact we'll meet his family in a future episode. Robert Hedges plays Juan, who is arguably the character who changes the most from the pilot, where he's basically a thug, whose favorite subject is assault. Juan as a character is still a work in progress. The one-centered episodes so far aren't actually his best episodes, but I did choose him as head the class 4 times. He works well with the others, but he also has his little moments to shine, and not just with the notes from his mother. I'm looking forward to seeing more of him and Arnold together especially, but I'm already enjoying his playing Chico to Cotter's Groucho. And yes, we will meet at least one of his family members. Lawrence Hilton Jacobs as Freddy is probably the most neglected of the 4 main sweat hogs, although he does get 2 strong episodes early on, Basket Case and of course Classroom Marriage. It's like they didn't know what to do with this character beyond he plays basketball and he's cool. At least 2 of my favorite later episodes are centered on Freddy, but we're not there yet. It's maybe not surprising that I chose him as head of the class only twice. John Sylvester White as Woodman changes gradually through the season, but remains an amusing antagonist with occasional sympathetic moments. And sometimes he just shows up for a minute, but he brings a different energy to the show. And we'll gradually learn more about this character, but his role doesn't change drastically over the series. As far as I recall, he's not particularly Flanderized in season 4. I chose him as head of the class twice, including on his pivotal No More Mr. Nice Guy, which I'll talk about in a bit. There are 3 semi-regular female students. There's Verna Jean, played by Vernee Watson, and she was always a bright spot, and I even chose her as head of the class for the Mr. Kotter teacher episode, where she's definitely not the center of the episode, but she has some good moments, and she's at the center of that great dance with the 4 main sweat hogs. She has a wonderful introduction in Classroom Marriage, which I'll talk about in a bit, but even more than with Freddy, they really don't seem to know what to do with her. I would have liked to have learned more about her character, especially because she has only 2 more episodes left. Deborah Lee Scott as Rosalie is always great early in the season, especially, of course, in Whodunit, which I'll be talking about. But Scott got other work on TV and wouldn't be back to Welcome Back, Kotter for a while. I feel like they developed her character relatively more than Verna Jane. The other semi-regular female student of season 1 is Judy Borden, whom Helene Lembeck makes funny, sometimes with just a couple of lines. And she even gets to be sympathetic in the Barbarino's Girl episode, although I felt like that episode kind of bungled the opportunity. There is potential for more depth to this character, but they wanted to kind of keep her as a student antagonist. And unlike Verna Jean and Rosalie, she would last into season 3. For the most part, I was not impressed by the adult guest stars, the teachers and so on, with the memorable exception of Bridget Hanley as Mary Frances Flanagan in The Reunion, where I chose her as the head of the class because I just found her delightful and fun, especially with Arnold. We will get more memorable guest stars in the next couple of seasons, but I won't spoil that by talking about them now. I give each episode a letter grade like in a classroom, so F- to A+. Season 1 ranges from 4 C+ to 1A with an average of a B, which I think is a very strong average because some shows take a while to get their bearings in season 1. Besides that A, there's 1 A- and 5 B+. So to narrow it down to my top 5, I had to make a couple of those B+ into honorable mention. One of these is episode 13, Arrivederci Arnold, which was written by Jewel Jaffe Rano and Jerry Rano. There was a tie for head of the class between Gabe and Arnold. The former because he has some funny moments, but he also admits when he's wrong. Arnold, of course, has a really nice arc with good character moments, as well as, of course, being funny. They both get to be Arnold at the end of the very funny Little Sweat Hogs production, where Gabe dresses up as Arnold, a favor that Arnold will repay later in the season. This episode also sees the development of the Julie and Arnold friendship. Then we get Gabe's funny reaction to their embrace. The episode also has some good examples of Gabe and Julie's physical affection. The other honorable mention episode is Follow the Leader Part 1, which was episode 16, and this was also written by the Ranos, and I felt like they brought some of their experience as a married couple to it. This was another tie for head of the class, and this time it was between Julie and Vinny. The former gets more character development than just the patient, supportive wife who listens to Gabe's jokes, which we get into many of the episodes, while Vinny has to reassess his life when he's no longer the leader of the Sweat Hogs. Gabe, as he so often is caught in the middle and handling it badly, although of course this hits him personally than if it was just a problem with the students. We also get to see more of the classroom dynamics, including with the extras. My fifth favorite episode is Kotter Makes Good, episode 21, which was written by George Yannick. The head of the class here is Gabe, because he's got this story about how he has to retake his senior finals. We see him repaying the Sweat Hogs' loyalty to him with his own sacrifice, but he also gets to do some funny imitations of his students, and it comes at the right moment towards the end of season 1 where we know these characters really well and we know where it's going, but it's fun to see. This episode, of course, also has the climax, for now, of Woodman trying to get Kotter fired, and I don't know if that will continue into season 2 or 3, but I feel like there will at least be some passive-aggressive lines about it, but probably not things to the extent of this episode or Mr. Kotter Teacher. My fourth favorite episode of the season was California Dreamin', which was episode 12. This was the only Welcome Back Kotter script by Michael Weinberger, and these top episodes are an interesting mix of people who never wrote for the show otherwise and people who wrote several episodes. The head of the class here is, of course, Susan Lanier playing Bambi. This character starts out as this bubbly, kind of spacey, stereotypical California blonde, and then there are more and more layers until the reveal towards the end. I wouldn't describe this as a semi-recurring character because there's only one more episode with her, but it is interesting to see what the female students are like on this mostly male show. This episode shows what the presence of a girl like that does to the male students, including them Californianizing themselves. The climax of that is the premiere of the Barbarino song. This episode also, of course, has Verna Jean and Julie being annoyed and jealous because of how the guys are reacting, and of course Gabe is caught in the middle as usual. My third favorite episode of season 1 is Who Done It, episode 4, another one written by the Ranos. The head of the class here is, of course, Rosalie, and she does a lot with the character. It's a different take on the quote-unquote easy girl than Bambi, because Rosalie is just more down to earth, but she punishes the guys for their slut shaming, and she includes the audience in on this and wins us over, I think, and remains likable, although you can understand why the guys are annoyed with her at the end. Of course, we have Arnold being sweet and funny, including his proposal in a different way than with Bambi. We see how the male students, including the extras, and one in particular looking very guilty, react to her. This is another episode where we see the Cotter's dynamic as a married couple, how he relies on her but kind of throws her into the situation, and we get Julie's one-on-one conversation with Rosalie. I wish there had been more things like that of female characters talking to each other, like the contrast in these two very different women. And this is definitely an episode where we have Kotter butting in and regretting it, but we know he'll continue to get involved in his students' problems. My second favorite episode this season was No More Mr. Nice Guy, which was episode 6. It was the first Welcome Back Kotter script written by George Yannick. The head of the class here is definitely Woodman, who gets to be very funny, and he actually has an arc that permanently shapes his character. He goes from, in the pilot, being annoyed by the old nickname of Woodface to, by the end of the season, being able to joke about being Old Man Woodface. In fact, just being able to joke at all. This is the episode that changes that, but it also has Gabe making the argument that somebody's got to be the Woodman, the disciplinarian, and it might as well be Woodman. Perhaps in a way Kotter is affected by it too, because he does have that conflict between wanting to be one of the guys, still a sweat hog, and having to be the authority figure and the teacher. We also get the fun scene of Woodman coming over to the Kotters and them having to work through the awkwardness of hosting him. That was a different side to Julie. Again, Gabe and Julie as a united front. Considering this aired just a couple episodes after Whodunit, it's interesting to see that Rosalie is pals with the four main sweat hogs, stealing Mr. Woodman's chalk and doing their boogie into class. So I like that and would have liked to have seen more of her kind of hanging out with the guys. My absolute favorite episode of the season is Classroom Marriage, which aired right after No More Mr. Nice Guy. I gave it an A. It is the only Welcome Back Kotter script written by William Rayner and Miles Wilder, but I felt like they had a good grip on the characters. A very interesting, well played out plot with basically two main scenes. The cold opening is a lead-in to the first main scene at the apartment, and then we get the scene in the classroom. The head head of the class this time is Freddie, with Verna Jean as the runner-up. Jacobs and Watson convincingly play a young couple in love, but at the same time confused and scared, while still being their witty, savvy selves. As a child, and now, I wish that there had been more development of this relationship, but it just fizzled out and she just became another student before eventually disappearing. We also get some great couple moments with Gabe and Julie, including their argument about tuna noodle casserole, which becomes a running gag for a while, and I think it must come back in season 2 because I always felt like it was a bigger deal than just a couple episodes mentioning it. We get the Marx Brothers-like zaniness of everyone coming over the Kotters at midnight, most of them in disguise. The laughter that you see with Gabe and Julie looks genuine, particularly the reaction to Arnold in the gorilla mask. In the classroom scene, we get the classroom marriage improvised skit, I guess. The highlighted that is Juan performing a Jewish wedding ceremony. Freddie and Verna Jean rock out a little bit to it. And of course, Arnold as their accident. This episode is the last with Rosalie, but she still gets some moments to shine. And yeah, I definitely wish there had been more episodes with both Verna Jean and Rosalie. The theme of this episode is trust, because it starts out with Kotter on the fire escape, feeling like the students don't trust him. And then it ends up that Freddie doesn't trust Verna Jean, who's possibly going to move away. We will see this theme again and again throughout season 1. It makes sense for a season 1 theme because they're all starting to get to know each other, particularly the students getting to know Kotter. How much can you trust each other? Overall, as I said, this is a really strong beginning to the series. Not the best season 1 of any show ever, but better than I expected. Where season 2 goes, I'm predicting that it will get more slapsticky and less of some borderline very special episodes, although we will get that later in pretty painful forms. I will be back to tell you about that in September. In the meantime, as I thought the lyrics went when I was 7, your dreams were all tickled out.